Welcome to AP Economics. This is Chapter 1, What is Economics? At the beginning of each chapter, I will provide a brief overview through a sample table of contents to give you a feel for what we're going to actually be talking about here in the chapter. So here's the brief overview for Chapter 1, What is Economics? The first thing that I'm going to be talking about is putting the study of economics into context of the social sciences. And in doing so, we'll help define for you and refresh memories in some part about what the social sciences are. We'll also touch on why the social sciences are the most important fields of study, and then give you a good working definition, fundamentals of working definition of economics. That will be followed by an appeal to the students as to why the study of economics and social sciences is particularly important to you, personally, professionally, and as a citizen. And then from there we'll get into some very foundational and fundamental concepts. The first part of the fundamental concepts will be covering the others in the second and third chapters here out of the first four. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the concepts surrounding basic rational decision making, the difference between needs. We will be introducing students to the concept of the rule of 70, the difference between scarcity and shortages, the factors of production, the types of capital that there are. We'll give the students a working definition of wealth and how that is determined. And then we'll conclude Chapter 1 with a brief look at how we study economics, look at the two subsets of the study, micro and macroeconomics, and the characteristics of each. We're now ready to move on and into the chapter, this first chapter, and as I had mentioned a moment ago in the chapter overview, we're going to start with talking about social science studies within social science and where economics fits into those sets of studies. In this brief look at the social sciences and economics as part of them, it may be useful here to step back for a second and put the social sciences in the context of science in general. So let's start with a simple question. What is a science? Well, a science has two aspects to the definition for science. First, it's a process by which knowledge is obtained from observation and study. Secondly, it can also be a category of knowledge that includes certain skills, facts, principles, and methods of study. This then leads us to a second simple question. What types of sciences are there? And there generally are three categories that most people are familiar with. The first are the physical sciences, the second natural sciences, and then the social sciences, which is what we're dealing with the study of economics. Let's take a moment and look at each one of these in just slightly more depth to help put them in sharper perspective. And we'll start with the physical sciences. So what is a physical science? Simply stated, it's a field of study that examines non-living matter or energy. The sub-studies in the physical sciences are things like physics, geology, astronomy, and math. The second science, natural science, is sometimes called life sciences in many respects. It's a field of study that primarily examines living and, in some cases, non-living matter. Some examples here would be biology and chemistry. The third, a social science. It's the studies of societies and social behaviors. It includes a broad range of studies which you may be familiar with: economics, political science, history, sociology, psychology, anthropology, and archaeology. The next question we have in our brief look at the sciences is the question of how they work. Key to understanding how all the sciences work, physical, natural, and social sciences, is the understanding of the scientific approach. The scientific approach is relating questions and theories to evidence. This is sometimes also called the scientific method, and you may have come across this earlier in your education in either a physical or a natural science class. Specifically, it's the characteristics of the physical and natural sciences applied to the scientific approach that set them apart from the social sciences. And the characteristics of the physical and natural sciences are as follows. In the scientific approach, they work with matter that is subject to natural laws. Stimuli will cause stable and predictable responses based upon those natural laws. The social sciences are a little bit different. The characteristics are different. The social sciences work with man that has a free will and cannot be made to completely be subject to unyielding laws. However, stimuli will still cause fairly stable, predictable responses in human behavior. Now that we have taken a look at the similarities and the differences between the sciences, we can take a closer look at the social sciences and why many people consider them the most important fields of study. In our quest to understand why the social sciences are the most important fields of study, we must actually turn first to yet another question. And that question is, what determines the fate of cultures and societies? Is it mathematical formulas? Is it natural phenomena that occurs? Or is it the mousetraps, the technologies that we invent? No, what determines the fate of cultures and society is what drives the decisions, behaviors, and actions of human beings. It's who controls the mathematical formulas and mousetraps and what they do with them. It's who controls the reactions to natural phenomenon and what they do in the wake of that phenomenon. And if the wrong people are put in place making the wrong decisions, as we have seen in numerous cases through history, it can really mean the success or the end of a culture or a society. So given this, consider some of the consequences of not investing in the study of the social sciences and not understanding how human nature and society works. I'll give you 3 points to consider. Not understanding why wars and genocide occurs. Not understanding why exploitation exists. That covers a wide variety of topics: crime, poverty, even slavery. And also, from a pure economic standpoint, why global economic depressions occur. Okay, so the social sciences are really important fields of study, and economics is one of the studies within the social sciences. So what specifically is it? A great place to start our study of economics is with a definition of the term itself. However, before I give you that definition, I'd like to point something out for students taking notes with either the prepackaged custom study guides that can be found on the website or using Cornell Notes. For those of you using prepackaged custom study guides, you will notice that key terms or key vocabulary is underlined and in quotes. You'll be able to easily match those terms up here during chapter presentation because those terms are highlighted in red. Definitions will either precede the term or immediately follow the term. For those of you taking Cornell notes, you will want to identify those terms here highlighted in red and make sure that you're getting the term and the definition listed in the left-hand side of your Cornell Notes page. All right, having covered that, let's move on then to the definition of economics. Simply stated, economics is the study of how people seek to satisfy their needs and wants by making decisions. There are three important parts to this definition that are highlighted in blue here. Needs and wants, two concepts which we will be looking at a little bit closer here in a few moments, and also the process of making decisions, which we'll be looking at in greater depth in both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The definition for economics seems pretty simple. However, what are needs and wants, and how do we go about making decisions? To begin to understand needs and wants and decision-making, we must first examine very closely what motivates human behavior. The answer to the question of what motivates human behavior was answered for us by a social psychologist in the early 1900s by the name of Abraham Maslow. Maslow is also considered the inventor of advertising. Maslow said that human behavior was driven by a desire to satisfy sets of needs in a logical order. I'd like to draw your attention to what I have highlighted in blue here and what Maslow said, to satisfy sets of needs in a logical order. What Maslow did was he took needs and categorized them by priority and also linked that to showing how those needs or categories need to be satisfied by human beings in a specific order and having one set dependent upon the other. To illustrate this, Maslow used a building block approach to show how this worked, and this building block approach became known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not familiar with the word hierarchy, let me help out here for a moment with that. Hierarchy, from a part of speech standpoint, is a noun, means organized or classified. Some related words are order, structure. Obviously, the opposite of this would be random or chaos. Used in another sentence, hierarchy. Here we have the military has a clearly defined hierarchy. Now, Maslow used a pyramid to illustrate his concept of the hierarchy of needs. Pyramids are commonly used to illustrate concepts like this for two reasons. First, pyramids are built in a building block approach with one layer being dependent upon the other for the structure. Secondly, pyramids are commonly used for these purposes because they are a symbol of structural strength. Now, Maslow said that the first thing that motivates human behavior is the requirement to satisfy our most fundamental set of needs. And there's nothing more fundamental than our physiological needs. In other words, the need for air, water, food, and waste removal. And those physiological needs that we have, I have listed here in their priority order. And this is very important to the overall concept that Maslow is trying to illustrate here of needs building upon and being dependent upon one another. For example, water and food, although being highly critical needs for survival, are secondary to air, because if we're not getting air, food and water and waste removal will not matter. So the first thing that motivates people in terms of their behavior, Maslow said, is the need for satisfying the survival needs. Now, Once that's done, Maslow said that human beings can focus their behavior and their motivations on satisfying the next set of needs up from physiological, which are safety needs, the need to feel security, protection from harm. I want to stop here for a second and point out again the fact that if our physiological needs are not being satisfied, we don't have to worry about our safety needs. Satisfying these and what's motivating us to get them satisfied are dependent on taking care of the most fundamental things first. Now, what Maslow did is he took these first two categories of needs, the fundamental needs, safety and physiological, and grouped them together. And he put a label on them using the word innate, and that's closely related to, if you will, natural, the word natural. And what he meant by this is that we don't spend too much time putting too much thought into getting these physiological and safety needs satisfied, particularly so in an advanced or modern society like we have here in the United States. So these things get taken care of as a matter of course. I'll use an example. We don't plan our day around when we're going to go to the bathroom for waste removal. And generally not too much planning is gone into when we're going to get our hands on some food. Breathing comes as a very natural thing to do, and we don't put too much thought into this. So he called these first two categories innate needs. Oh, and I should point out here that isn't always the case in every society around the world. There are some that are not modern societies where people are clearly focused on a minute-by-minute basis, day to day, on getting physiological needs satisfied, where their next meal is going to come from, where they're going to be able to source water. And a lot of thought then goes into, in those cases, the acquisition of those needs. And quite frankly, the people in those types of societies do not focus on very much on the next set of needs that I'll be talking about. Maslow then said that once these primary needs, safety and physiological, are satisfied, the second thing that winds up motivating human behavior is the requirement to satisfy higher level of what he called secondary needs. Now, the first category there he labeled as social needs. Human beings are social beings. We do well with a sense of belonging, a sense of love. But again, I want to point out here that if our focus is down at the physiological level, not much time is spent here on the social. So everything below social needs to get satisfied first. Maslow said once we start to address our social needs and satisfy them, it helps to satisfy our esteem needs. Now, esteem needs are very closely related to social needs because to have recognition and status, let's say, within a group, you need to have developed that sense of belonging and connection to the other people in the group. Maslow said that once esteem and social needs are satisfied, the person is what he labeled as self-motivated. They can turn their motivation, their behavior, and their outlook in life to setting goals and objectives for themselves and what they want to achieve. Now, Maslow took these last three categories of needs in his hierarchy and bundled them together and put the label on them as acquired. And his point here was that these three categories of needs, social, esteem, and the self-motivated for goal setting, there's a lot of thought that needs to be applied to going and acquiring the getting these needs satisfied, as opposed to what we saw with the more fundamental ones that come as a matter of nature. So we actively need to plan and pursue the acquisition of getting these secondary level needs satisfied. Okay, Maslow made it pretty clear to us that survival obviously drives our desire to satisfy our innate needs. But what drives our desires to satisfy the acquired needs? This is a real important question, and you must understand the answer to this to be both a professional and a personal success in life. The answer to this question is the strengths and flaws in our personalities. If you're not familiar with the word flaws that's used here, it's a noun as a part of speech, an imperfection that's often hidden and can cause failure. Used in another sentence, the bridge collapsed because it had a flaw, an imperfection, in its support structure. Abraham Maslow's work in the study of motivation and human behavior was further enhanced by one of the most famous philosophers of the modern age, Ayn Rand. And Rand taught us about the roles of our personality strengths and flaws in this process of satisfying those acquired needs. Rand said that when flaws in personality drive the pursuit of the acquired needs, a profile of an individual looks like the following. With regard to social needs, they are defined by others. In the study of psychology, a psychologist would tell you that somebody defined by others would be a codependent person, meaning that they're living solely or primarily to please other people, and they really don't have a sense of identity, self-identity. Rand said that also individuals profiled this way are, from an esteem standpoint, are living only for positive strokes. You may know somebody in your life that really has a bad day if they're not continually reinforced that the things that they're doing have value, or they personally have value and are accepted by others. The next part of the profile, Rand said, is that individuals that fall into this category are motivated only by the vision of a group. We talked about codependency and not having a sense of self-identity. It's just closely tied to this as well, that they don't feel as though they have goals and objectives on their own, that they're more closely tied to what a group is doing. Psychologists and sociologists would tell you that a profile of an individual fitting these three characteristics is very common in our societies today to be, as an example, a gang member. Fits this profile very, very closely. This type of profile, Rand said, and pretty much holds true, generally results in a life that's unfulfilled, many times being unhappy, aimless, and possibly end in ruin. If you're not familiar with the word ruin, it's a noun, total destruction, making something formless, useless, or valueless. Some synonyms: destroy, disintegration. The opposite of this, of ruin, is obviously to build and enhance. Used in another sentence, after the battle the city lay in ruin. Rand said that when strength drives the pursuit of the acquired needs, we get a different profile of the individual. In this case, you're not defined by others. You're not concerned with status or recognition. And the individual has their own vision, purpose, and mission in life. This mix of traits generally result in a life that is fulfilled, happy to accomplish, and probably will produce great success. Ayn Rand also said something very interesting about both the strong and the flawed in the way they go about satisfying their acquired needs. And what she said was that there are two tools that are used by both the strong and the flawed in the pursuit of their acquired needs. If you're not familiar with the word pursuit as it's used here, it's a noun. It means the act of chasing. Used in another sentence, he was focused on the pursuit of his dream to become a doctor. The two tools that Rand refers to here are power and money. And here's how the strong and the flawed go about using these tools to acquire those and satisfy those needs. She said the flawed rely on these tools, power and money, heavily for the self-serving purpose of acquiring their social and esteem needs, while the strong use these, power and money, to achieve their highest level need, which is realizing their vision and their mission. Again, if you're not familiar with the word realizing as it's used here, it's a verb to comprehend completely, to make real, actualize, gain, or achieve are synonyms. She rejoiced upon realizing her goal of graduating from college. Now, having looked at the ideas of Abraham Maslow and Ayn Rand, you may be asking yourself, what do they have to do with the study of economics? Well, they have a lot to do. It's through the ideas of Maslow and Rand that they define the foundation by which we can begin to analyze decision making. And decision making is a very important part of the study of economics. At this point in the chapter, it's also a good time for me to remind students that every chapter has a set of primary and secondary level supplementary videos that can be found through links on the course website. And these videos are great tools. Some of them are very entertaining. All of them are informative, but great tools to help summarize for study purposes the concepts that we've covered in chapters. In this first chapter and the first supplementary video that you find on the website is a review of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and a very nice presentation. Students are strongly urged, and it's recommended, that they make themselves available to look at those and use them in their studying for each one of our chapters. Now, before we start to look at the role of decision making in the study of economics, I'd like to make a practical appeal to you personally as to why you need to understand how to make good decisions in general. And really, there are three reasons for this. The first is so that you can make well-educated and informed decisions for your personal survival in life. The second is so that you can contribute positively to your society as a citizen. And third, so that you can avoid being exploited by the educated, the powerful, and or the wealthy. If you're not familiar with the word exploited as it's used here, here's a little background on it. It means to be taken advantage of. Manipulate, play are related words used in another sentence. One team exploited or took advantage of the flaws, we've looked at that word before, of the other word, of the other to win the game. Okay, let's get started in our deeper look at the decision-making process. Earlier in this chapter, when I gave you the definition of economics, there were two terms within that definition which you see here now, needs and wants. The first step we need to take in studying the decision-making process, and also it's the first step in good decision-making, is to be able to distinguish between what is a true need and what is a want. You see, needs is highlighted in red here, so let's define what a need really is. Needs are must-haves to survive. There are no substitutes. Coming off our study of Maslow would tell you that true needs are those physiological needs that we looked at, because they come first before all others, and they are the ones we have to satisfy to survive, such as air, water, and food. And yes, I had also added in, when we looked at Maslow's hierarchy, the removal of waste. Those are true needs, the must-haves to survive. But we do live in a modern society, and there are some additional needs, true needs, that are placed upon us to survive, or at least be able to function in a modern society. Most people would say the answer to this question as to what those might be would be shelter. But that's not necessarily the case. We have plenty of people in our society that live every day without shelter. The homeless, you can find the homeless in all cities and towns, across the country. So shelter is not a true need, and quite frankly has not been a true need for mankind from the beginning of time, because very early on human beings lived without shelter. But what other true needs are there for a modern society? Well, we actually have some laws in place that prohibit us from walking around without clothes. So clothes fall into the category in a modern society as being a true need. Now, think about this for a second. Air, water, food, clothes. They seem like simple decisions to make regarding acquiring these things, but you'd be surprised as to how many people can actually have difficulty with this. And we're going to take a look at that now. Now, with regard to any decision that we make, but particularly with regard to our needs, we should be striving to make rational decisions. If you're not familiar with the word rational, here's what it means. It means informed, logical, and well thought out. Now, I'm going to give you two examples to think about here, decisions that were made. And I want you to think about whether these were rational decisions. Here's the first. Is this the right food to be eating? A number of you are probably looking at this picture and saying, sure, because it tastes great. But is it the right thing for you health-wise? How about this? Are these the right amount of clothes? In particular, look at the shoes. How many pairs of shoes does one really need? But take it a step further and think, what were the costs associated with that? Where the strong and the flawed begin to go their separate paths in decision-making is being able to distinguish between what is truly a need and what is a want. Now here's your definition for wants. They're nice to have luxuries. If we go back to our example with the shoes, granted, shoes being part of clothing are a need in a modern society, but 40 pairs of shoes are certainly a luxury. Now our next step in decision making is going to delve a little deeper and show you how the decision making process can be a little bit more complex. I'm going to give you two examples, and I'd like for you to consider two things. Which of these in these examples are luxuries and at what cost, and also overlay that with which are rational decisions. Now let's start with something simple. Deodorant. Now, stop here for a second and think about this. Deodorant is certainly truly not a need. People have lived a long time and survived without the use of deodorant. But let's be a little bit more flexible for the moment and say, in a modern society, again, the use of some sort of deodorant is something that would be considered a need or that would be acceptable. Now, just like there are with clothes, there are hundreds, possibly even thousands of different choices of clothing, but also deodorants. And I'm going to pick two here as an example to choose among to illustrate a couple of points. Here we have a basic run-of-the-mill type of simplistic deodorant on the left-hand side, and one of the more what we'll call upscale brands over on the right. The difference between these two, depending upon the store that you may buy them from, roughly can range at about $3 pricing difference between the two. Certainly the one on the left can get the job done, but a lot of people go and they buy the one on the right. Why? Well, I'll bring you back to a point that was made about Abraham Maslow earlier on in this chapter. I had mentioned to you that he was the father of advertising. Well, the people that market products and rely on advertising clearly understand the lessons that Maslow had taught us, and they know there are some people out there looking to get their esteem and social needs satisfied, and they develop products and services targeted at people who have that particular need and are willing to, in many cases, pay additional amounts of money to get those needs satisfied. If you are having trouble understanding what I'm referring to or need a further example, on our course website, under Chapter 1 in the supplementary videos, there's an actual Axe commercial. I recommend you go take a look at that and see whether you can figure out what the reference is in terms of getting some guy's needs satisfied back to that category of social and esteem needs. Now you may say to me, well, it's only $3, the difference between the two. Does it really matter? Well, as I'll show you here in a few minutes, every dollar counts, and we actually have some situations where it's more than just $3. It actually runs into the tens of thousands of dollars where people make decisions based upon thinking that they can get certain needs satisfied through the purchase of some products. Now let's move on to another example to illustrate the point. Here's another pretty simple one, and from a decision-making standpoint in a modern society, we all need transportation, whether it's to school or work. Transportation is, an integral part of our functioning or a need in our modern society. And just like with clothing and just like with deodorants, there are lots of choices for us with regard to transportation. But which would be considered a luxury and which would be considered a non-luxury, and at what cost? And when does it make choosing one over the other become a more rational decision? Well, here we have a simple type of ride, a standard sedan, and over on the right-hand side we have a Hummer, an upscale vehicle. Actually, interestingly enough, this vehicle was designed for war and use in military situations, not really to drive around the streets of a given city or a town. But yet we see many people having purchased at significant amounts over and above average sedans and other vehicles these Hummers to drive the kids to school or drive to work with no threat of using them in a military situation. But why might these people be willing to spend tens of thousands more for that form of transportation? Well, I suggest to you, as the advertisers would, is that there are some people that need to have their esteem and social needs satisfied by driving a vehicle like that. Well, that's fine if you have plenty of money, but I offer up to you, tens of thousands of dollars are a lot more than the $3 difference between a deodorant. And do you really need a vehicle that's designed for war to get the kids to school or to get yourself to work?
At this point, you may be asking why we're making such a big deal over rational decision-making, as it seems like common sense. Well, the statistics continually show that most people either do not understand rational decision-making or are not disciplined enough to make the right decisions. Let's take a look at a couple of examples to illustrate my point. In introducing you to rational decision-making, I have been using decision examples using money matters or financial matters. The reason for this is that decisions regarding your financial matters are as important as the decisions you make regarding your health or whether you'll abide by our society's laws. So here are a few questions to consider in looking at people's behavior on decision-making regarding financial matters. The first question we'll look at is, how have Americans been handling collectively their financial responsibilities? We'll also look at what has recently been the annual savings rate for Americans. And a third question is, how much does it really cost to live? In recent decades, the American public has not handled its financial responsibilities very well. They have gone deep into debt, they have not saved, and as a result, personal bankruptcies have been on the rise. These statistics usually cause the third question that I asked a moment ago to be revised and asked this way. Is it bad decisions that have caused this, or is it just getting too expensive to live? Well, I will first show you why I believe the answer is not that it's too expensive to live. I will then leave the consideration of bad decision making up to you. So first, the cost of living adjusted for inflation over the past 40 years has actually declined due to the advancements in technology and the expansion of global trade. In fact, on a relative scale, basic commodities today cost less as a proportion of income than they did in the early 1800s. So the cost of living question is highly suspect. However, we're now going to look at the impact education may have on financial well-being, and I believe you will find it gives us some interesting insights. Coming up is a quick comparison between the cost of living and educational attainment. This comparison should stimulate two questions for you. First, why aren't more people making the rational decision to get educated, as only 30% of our public has college-level training? The second question is that based on the debt statistics that we've just looked at, are people at all levels of income making good, rational financial decisions?
To answer the question about how much it costs to live, this is a personal budgeting exercise that I use quite often with students, and they find it very interesting. This is a monthly list of expenses that's based on a 20-year-old adult living on their own in a semi-rural, semi-urban Southern California community. Now, this is just to give us a general idea as to monthly and annual cost of living. As you go down this list and look at the particular items, you may want to change the dollar amounts or eliminate a category and maybe add in some other category of expense. But generally speaking, the numbers aren't going to probably change that much. So again, these are monthly figures. If we take this and add this up, you see that it's a monthly expense total of $2,705. And if we do the simple math and change this to an annual expense figure, it comes out to $32,460. So that's expenses in terms of how much does it cost to live. But the other side of the coin is how much do you earn to be able to pay for your expenses and cover your expenses? So we're going to contrast the expense against income. And we're going to take a look at what determines generally income over the average working lifetime. And in doing so, it's traditional in the study of economics to match this up to education levels, because education levels are a strong determinant of an individual's annual income over their working lifetime. And I think it'll be pretty obvious to you what we're doing here. Generally, individuals that do not earn a high school diploma, and by the way, these numbers are right from the government's Bureau of Labor Statistics, show that the average annual income over the working lifetime of somebody without a high school diploma is $18,000 per year. And by the way, as a point of reference for you, that's just about minimum wage. Might be slightly over that. With a high school diploma, the statistics show that the annual income over the average working lifetime will be $27,000 a year. Now, a point here on this, with the high school diploma, you don't walk out into your first job earning $27,000 a year. Remember, this is the average annual income over the working lifetime. Probably in the later stages of your career with a high school diploma, you should be able to earn more than $27,000. So it's the average. If you have a trade school certificate or a 2-year college degree, the statistics show that you'll average usually about between $38,000 and $42,000 per year. And another point about these figures is that this also assumes that you actually get up and go and do something. Okay, if you just having a diploma or a degree does not guarantee this. You actually have to put it to work for yourself. A 4-year college degree shows that the average annual income is $57,000 per year. Now, if we stop here for a moment and look at our annual expense total, we see that it's not until you get to the 4-year college degree education level that you start to get some separation here between expenses and income. And you'll note, please, that on the list of monthly expenses, there down at the bottom, you see that savings has a question mark against it. Savings are important for the unexpected, but also savings are important for something else which we'll talk about here in a few minutes in terms of what it can do for you over the long term in terms of retirement and some other financial protections. There is another category of education, an advanced degree such as a master's degree or a doctorate. The studies show that the average annual income for people that put that to work is $74,000 a year. The value of an education, well, if we just look at this expense stream, we can see that the level of education is, in some respects, priceless because it gives you the breathing room to cover the expenses for a living.
Okay, it's clear that getting educated and actually putting it to use can provide you with some financial breathing room. But is there a way to ensure your overall and long-term financial security? And yes, there is a way to do this.
Anyone can become financially secure if they understand and leverage the rule of 70. In the studies of math and investing, this is also known as the compounding rule. In a moment, I'm going to tell you how this works. But before I do, I'd like to share a testimonial with you about just how important understanding this concept is. The testimonial comes from a person that is considered one of the most intelligent people ever to have lived, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said that the rule of 70 is the greatest mathematical discovery of all time. In fact, it's the 8th wonder of the world. That's a pretty strong endorsement from a pretty bright individual. So here's how it works. The rule of 70 shows us how fast an investment will double by dividing the rate of growth into the number 70. So let's take a look at an example of how this works. And let's say we have $1,000 that we can get a 10% interest or growth rate on. We want to know how long it will take for that $1,000 to turn into $2,000 at that growth rate. Using the rule of 70, we simply take the 10% growth rate and divide it into the number 70. And it tells us that it will take 7 years for that $1,000 to turn into $2,000. This usually leads to the next question that gets asked, which is how do you get the money that you invest to double faster and to reach financial independence and security quicker? Well, there's a couple of things you need to do. First, Work with a financial advisor to find the best and safest growth rates possible for your money. Second, start investing and saving as early as possible. Third, increase your savings as you earn more over your lifetime. And fourth, try to avoid taking any money out of what you have put into your savings and investments. To show you how this works, on our website, you will be able to find under the course and personal resources section an actual rule of 70 illustration of somebody that starts saving at a relatively young age, but by the time they reach 50, they actually have $1 million in the bank. Now let's shift here and take a look for a moment at decisions being made with regard to our national and cultural survival. And in doing so, I'm only going to focus on decisions with regard to taxes and spending. Here's a question for you. Do you know what you pay in taxes? And the answer to that is probably no. And that's very typical for full-time students, even if you don't have a part-time job. Another question, what does the government do with your tax payments if you do pay any taxes? Or for that matter, the tax payments that are made by your parents and guardians, both personally and professionally. What the government does with it is, just like an individual, it takes the money and it spends it on various services and creating other things such as public goods, which we'll talk about in upcoming chapters. In doing so, they have to pay people for services and for products, just like any individual has to pay for things. And that brings up this concept of a deficit. What is a deficit? It's spending more money than you take in. And an individual can do this as well as a government. You may be asking, well, how can you spend more money than you take in? Quite simply, to do that, you wind up borrowing it. And remember, there's a cost associated with that. When you borrow money, you have to pay money or interest for the privilege of borrowing the money. Now, just a moment ago, I talked about borrowing money to cover a deficit. And that brings me to the concept of debt. When people talk about somebody's debt or the national debt, we're talking about the accumulation of deficits and the interest that's paid to borrow the money to cover the deficits. The national government, the federal government of the United States, has been running deficits for quite some time. And they've been borrowing money and paying interest so that they can cover the deficits. Now, should we be worried about that? Well, I believe we should. The federal government is no different than an individual. The debts will need to be repaid at some time. At the moment, the federal government has accumulated over $16 trillion in national debt. Now, $16 trillion is a difficult number for people to get their minds around. So we're going to spend a moment here to try to put that into some perspective for you, which will also help you understand the enormity of the challenge that faces us in paying that down. Okay, the United States national debt is in excess of $16 trillion. That's an awfully tough figure to get your mind around. What we'll try to do here is give you a point of reference for that, and we'll work on trying to paint a picture for you as to what $1 trillion would look like, and then you can take it from there and try to visualize what the 16 plus trillion might look like. We'll start with a $100 bill. It's currently the largest U.S. denomination bill in general circulation. I don't know if everyone has seen them, but I certainly know that fewer people have owned them or had one in their pocket. And if you did, it would be guaranteed to make a friend wherever they go. All right, we'll take it up from there. A packet of 100 $100 bills is less than a half-inch thick. That contains a total of $10,000, and it can fit easily into your pocket. And this next pile that we're looking at in this illustration is $1 million. In other words, it's 100 packets of $10,000. And technically, you could fit that into a grocery bag. So again, not taking up too much space. While $1 million can be stuffed into a grocery bag, some people might find that unimpressive. $100 million is a little more respectable. It fits neatly onto a standard shipping pallet. And here we have $1 billion. We've got 10 pallets of bills here, and we're starting to really get a perspective on some size. And here you have $1 trillion. And yes, that's a million, or 1,000 billion. It's a 1 followed by 12 zeros. And notice that the pallets that we're looking at here are all double stacked. And remember that they're all $100 bills. Now, a $16 trillion debt would multiply this by 16. And that'll give you a feel for what, visually, a trillion or 16 trillion might look like. Before we move on to this last section and wrapping up Chapter 1 on some foundational technical economic concepts, I want to recommend that students take a moment to visit the course website and view the supplemental videos on the Rule of 70 and national debt. There's a couple on each, and I think they would prove to be very valuable in your studies. Now on to the last section of this chapter for some of these foundational concepts. The first thing that we're going to do is take a look at needs and wants a little differently, more from a technical economic perspective. What are needs and wants? Well, they're goods, which are physical objects, and services, actions or activities that one person performs for another. The second thing we need to do is take a look at how people of a society go about seeking to fulfill their needs and wants. And they do it three ways. One, as individually as consumers. Secondly, as groups through businesses. And third, through governments. Now, as we have seen, the hard part in seeking to meet our needs and wants is actually the decision-making about what to choose, and that holds even for the needs. Now, this usually brings up a question, such as this: why can't we have everything? And the answer to that is no. It's not possible. And then that leads us to usually another question: okay, why? The answer to the question why is because all the resources that we use to provide goods and services are scarce. And what we mean by that is that the resources are limited in quantity. In other words, how much of them that there is. Now, please don't confuse the concept of scarce or scarcity with the concept of a shortage. A shortage is not producing the resources that we have up to the capacity that we can produce them. We'll look at two examples here to illustrate the differences between scarcity and shortage. Earlier in your education, somebody may have explained to you the difference between renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources can be replaced. A classic example would be a tree. We use the wood from trees for a variety of purposes, and usually when one is cut down, a tree is replaced so that we have a continuing supply of the resource. A classic non-renewable resource is oil. There's a limited amount of oil on the earth that's used for a variety of purposes, but once it is all used, it's gone. We use the non-renewable resources conveniently to illustrate the concept of scarcity. And I'm going to use oil to illustrate that concept. I pose the question, why does the price of oil continue to rise? Well, oil is a very valuable resource, and demand continues to increase. And there's less and less oil every day. It's a scarce resource. Now, to illustrate the side of shortage, or the concept of shortage, we'll use this situation. Suppose that farmers have a record crop of lettuce. And what we mean by that is that the resource of the land is used to its maximum, and it produces the maximum amount of lettuce that it could produce. But no lettuce makes it to market, to the store shelf, because of a trucker strike. Here our problem is not production of the resource. We had a record crop of lettuce, but no lettuce gets consumed because of the trucker strike. In other words, in the stores and on the shelves, there's a shortage. It was not a resource problem. I'm now going to come back to the concept of goods and services to introduce you to the next foundational economic concept. Goods and services are put together with three building blocks. We call them the factors of production. For all you mathletes in the class, you'll recognize this as being very similar to a mathematical equation where variables or factors are multiplied together to produce something. We're talking about the same concept here. Factors, as it's used in this sense, for those of you that may not be familiar with the word or remember it from math class, a factor is one that actively contributes to an accomplishment, a result, or a process. Many times we call factors variables. Synonyms are elements, components, or an ingredient part. And you see here related words, cause, agent, an instrument, or a number. Used in another sentence, weather was a factor in the outcome of the game, a variable in the outcome of the game. The factors of production, there are three, and we like to call them the following. There's land, which represents natural resources. A few moments ago I talked about oil and trees. Water would be included in this. Any natural resource we classify generally as land. There's labor, the second factor of production, the effort that a person devotes to a task and is paid for. And the third factor of production is capital. And capital is defined as any human-made resource that is used to produce other goods and services. Capital has some unique aspects to it. We're going to examine those a little bit closer here in a few moments. But continuing with our math analogy, here we have our equation with our variables and a product at the end. Land times labor times capital equals goods and services. This equation is very important to businesses and societies that are both interested in producing goods and services. And if a business or a society does not have access to one of these factors, they need to find a way to secure access to that factor so that they can produce goods and services. That's one of the reasons why businesses and nations trade. We'll get into that a little bit deeper as we move forward in the semester. Another way I'd like to illustrate this concept of how important the factors of productions are is to use an old-fashioned three-legged stool. You may have seen one of these that people use to reach something high on an upper-level cabinet or something of the like, where they step on it to raise themselves up to get their hands on whatever they're looking for. Well, a three-legged stool has usefulness when the three legs are properly supporting the platform. And you can think of the factors of production, land, labor, and capital are the legs of the stool that help us produce goods and services. It's a very simple illustration that helps to really define the importance of the factors of production to the production of goods and services. Now, some people in some studies, sections of studies of economics, say there are actually 4 factors of production. In the classic study of economics, we really focus on the 3, land, labor, and capital. Some others say there are 4. They include entrepreneurialism in the mix of the factors of production. As I'll show you here, classically, we do it in a different form. When I mentioned a few moments ago that we'll be looking at capital in further detail in the aspects of it, we actually include entrepreneurialism under capital as a certain type of capital. And that leads us to the question here, well, how many types of capital are there? And let's talk about that. Here are the 2 types of capital. The first I'd like to talk about is physical capital. Physical capital are things made by humans that are used to create other goods and services. Now, I know this sounds very close to the definition of capital, which we looked at a couple minutes ago, but bear with me. I think you'll see the difference between the 2 types pretty clearly here in a moment. So what's an example of physical capital? I'm going to use first the example of a tractor. A tractor is physical capital. It's made by humans and used to create other goods and services, crops as an example. We get 3 general benefits from physical capital. Stop and think here for a second of the farmer who, before tractors were invented, had to plow their fields with horse-drawn plows. There was a limit to the amount that they could get done using horse-drawn plows, and with the tractor, we were able to give farmers extra time to actually do more, get more done, plow a greater number of fields, and therefore produce more crops. Yes, that made them more productive, and that's a natural outgrowth of having extra time. But there's a third benefit here, and I'll continue with the story on farmers, but then also jump to another example as well. The third benefit is that physical capital can provide us with additional knowledge. Continuing with the story of the farmer, by being able to produce more, by being able to plow more and have extra time, the farmer may also have enough time to set aside to go and take a class or a course, as an example, in agronomy, that is on fertilizers and watering systems and so forth, to further yet increase their productivity, and would not have been able to spend the time to do that if they didn't have a tool such as a tractor to be able to take care of their fundamental needs very quickly. Here's another example of how physical capital can increase our knowledge: the use of computers. Computers are physical capital. Today, the access that we have to information has made us as a society far more productive than we were 30, 40 years ago. So there's another example of a benefit of physical capital being knowledge and productivity using a different type of equipment. In the classical study of economics, the second type of capital that we refer to is human capital. The knowledge and skills workers gain through education and experience, and that gets applied to the production of goods and services. In Newer Age thinking and study of economics, this is where they have singled human capital out under the title of entrepreneurialism. Now, having been introduced to the factors of production, we can move on to our next fundamental concept, and that's the concept of wealth, and we'll define it here for you. Wealth is simply the value of your factors of production, and we can look at that from an individual personal perspective, a business perspective, as well as a societal perspective. The value of our factors of production will define our wealth. A natural follow-on question is, because we'd all probably like to be as wealthy as we can, how do you create more wealth? And simply, you need to make sure that your capital in the factors of production is being used to create surplus value. If you're not familiar with the word surplus, what it means, it's an adjective being more than or in excess of what is needed or required. Excess, extra, spare, bounty, stockpile. Due to good weather conditions, the farmer ended the year with a surplus after the harvest. Well, continuing along with the farmer analogy here and story, farmers that take advantage of automation like the tractor and physical capital in making sure that they're getting the most out of the land that they have to create a surplus will therefore in return make them wealthier. In wrapping up Chapter 1, our first foundational chapter, we're going to take a brief look at how we're going to approach our study of economics. Generally, the study of economics is broken into two broad sections, one being microeconomics and the other macroeconomics. It's always good to have a solid foundation having been built in microeconomics to better understand macroeconomics. So we spend the first half of the year of our study in the area of microeconomics in preparation for the second half of the year in our study of macro. So let me give you a couple of characteristics about what the two studies actually look like. Microeconomics is really the study of fundamental economic concepts and decision making, for example, which we've done here in Chapter 1 and we will continue to do in Chapter 2. Also, it's the study of how resources are used, as well as how markets and businesses are organized and work. On the other hand, with the study of macroeconomics, we step back and look at the big picture. Macroeconomics is the study of methods of managing the overall economy. We look at broad measurements of an economy, such as overall growth and trade. And we also look at special challenges, such as inflation, poverty, and unemployment, and how to manage them. I want to remind students that on our course website, you will be able to find a video, supplemental video, that helps explain the difference between the component parts of the study of economics, micro and macroeconomics. Strongly recommend that students spend a few minutes to view those videos, as well as all the other videos related to, supplemental videos related to Chapter 1. This brings us to the conclusion of our Chapter 1 studies. I thank you for your time.